is some of the greatest, most iconic moments in professional wrestling history. And today we've got one of the most iconic from someone on this show who happens to know one of the participants pretty well, one of the greatest champions of all time, Mr. Jack Brisco, when he lost the title 1975 in December to Mr. Terry Funk.
That's right, John. And, just kind of a basic setup of this thing, back into the day, and I know the young kids hate it because I hated hearing it when I was a young kid back in my day. But back in the old NWA championship days, these champions, they when you won that title, when they awarded you that title, you were committed 100% to a schedule that just unbelievable. And each night, just bear in mind that you're traveling from territory to territory, what we used to call territories. I don't need to go there because everybody's smart listens to this show. You know what a territory is. But as a champion, you would have to go into like Memphis and work with Jerry Lawler, but it wasn't always like it. Jerry Lawler was a top guy, but then you might have to, after Memphis, you might have to go to Padokie, Kentucky, or Pahokee, Kentucky, whatever the hell the name of that Kentucky town is. And I love that town too. And work with a guy that don't quite have the talent as Jerry Lawler, but you still got to do the same damn thing. You got to make this guy look good, and you got to go 50, 60 minutes with this guy. So, one night you might be working with the major star. The next night you might be working with a guy that they're trying to build, and he's not quite ready for prime time yet, but you're the guy charged with getting him ready. And the next night you might go into Texas after Memphis, work with a Dick Murdoch one night, who's one of the greatest in the world. And then the next night you're in Abilene, Texas, you got to work with a damn rookie John Layfield to make him look like a star, which is hard to do. But those old NWA champions back in those days could do it. So Jack had just reached his tipping point. He had reached that point where he was on the road all the time. He bought himself a 32-foot yacht down here in Florida, and he kept it over the shore. He put it in dry dock. He took it out one damn time while he was champion. He wanted to enjoy himself. He wanted to enjoy his spoils, but he couldn't. And his physical, Jack wasn't a big guy, and he would go around wrestling guys from 200 pounds to 350 pounds for that world title. It took a toll on Jack, and both mentally and physically. He was just, as they say, he was just at the point where he was just burnt. And so he called Sam Mutzig, called Eddie Graham first, told Eddie, because Eddie was the boss, and told Eddie that, he was fed up with it and he was ready to drop it. Eddie said, well, it comes as quite a surprise. We haven't taken a vote. Who would you recommend you drop it to? Back to Dory? And he said, hell no. He said, back to Harley? No. He said, I want to drop it to Terry Funk. And people were shocked that Jack wanted to do that because the backstory of Jack winning the title was supposed to be from a Funk, and it never happened, But Jack was a businessman, and Jack wanted to go one up on him. And so he handpicked Terry Funk to do this thing. Terry didn't really know, and the storyline was advertised in Miami as Jack Brisco versus Dory Funk Jr. World return match. Well, Dory won the title match. Oh, so come night of the matches, and not a lot of people even knew what was going on. The boys are, all of a sudden, Terry Funk shows up, and they make a big announcement, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, Dory Funk Jr. Couldn't make the matches. His plane got delayed, but Terry Funk is here to fill in for him. That's not a big downgrade from Dory, going to Terry. So, people bought the storyline because Dory had no-showed once before, so we got Terry in there. So they have the match. So what I'm saying, Terry wasn't real prepared for the match either. So then they turn out to have a classic world championship match.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned, like when you're a top team, like say the Chicago Bulls in the '90s was Michael Jordan, you play 82 games just like everybody else, but your 82 games are harder than everybody else's because when you show up to play the Dallas Mavericks, the Los Angeles Lakers, the whoever that you're playing, that's the biggest night of their year. So when Jack shows up to wrestle a Dick Murdoch in Texas or a Harley in Kansas City or whoever it is, or Joe Blow in Paducah, that's the biggest night of his career. That's the biggest night. And Jack has to do that every single night. That guy that gets to do that one match, 60 minutes, he's going to be sore for a couple of days. He gets over and goes back to his regular territory. Jack then goes somewhere else and does it again the next night. I mean, I don't think people realize how hard it was on these champions to go in these different places, and every single event was a huge event every single night.
Oh, you're exactly right, John, and you got to step up to that each night, and you can't take advantage of the local guy. You got to make him look like a star. That's your job. One of the biggest pet peeves Jack had, you stay around. He said he would walk out to the ring and there'd be a full dressing room. Oh, Jack, yeah, Jack, we'll watch your match, all this stuff. And then by the time in Jack's matches, all the Terrys and Dorys and Ricks and the Harleys, they were all 60-minute, 45, 60-minute matches before, if you had to finish, it was 45, 50 minutes. But most of them ended up at 60 minutes. Jack said the biggest thing, he would come back to the dressing room. He'd be the only damn guy in there. Now, here's a guy champion coming into your town, to draw you, make you some extra money because the champion's at that. You get back and you're the only guy in the dressing room, and it was kind of depressing to him. So both, like I said, both mentally and physically, Jack had reached that tipping point where he was just ready to call his own shot, say, I'm ready to give this baby up, let somebody else take a run at it.
And I know he told the story before, but you can tell it real briefly that when Jack got done as the NWA champion, he famously threw his watch in the lake.
Yeah, well, yeah, that not only with that championship, it wasn't the watch at that time, because we hooked up, a couple of years later with Vince and was making those brutal schedules, 45 days at a time, and a blizzard up in New Jersey, and I just talked to Don Morocco today, and he brought that up, and so he said he quit, and then. When I finally got off the road, he had a little weekend party over his place out there. He said, I quit. Yeah, everybody's saying, yeah, sure, Jack. He walked out on dock. He said, I've been living by this thing. And it was a gold Omega watch. It wasn't no cheap $35 Seiko watch from Tokyo, Japan. It was one of those Swiss-made Omega watches, solid gold. He took that baby off and he threw it in his lake. He never again wore another watch the rest of his life.
That's awesome. Well, this match that we've got, it's a little bit edited down. So we had the finish. We have a couple great promos, but just so people know, the match starts about halfway through, and part of it's edited down. But it's a terrific match. The video quality is great, but it's one of the most iconic moments in professional wrestling history. The day Jack Brisco dropped the title to Mr. Terry Funk. Josh, if you could tee that up, let's get started.
Miami, Florida, Convention Beach Auditorium. Now, what a great place for wrestling.
20 minutes into this match now.
20 minutes in the match now, according to the commentary. And that's the great Gordon Soley doing this. Look at Funk here. Only Funk can do this.
Now, Terry's the one in the red boots. We've gone over Jack and Terry's body style there a lot, but Terry's the one in the red boots. And red knee pads. Jack never wore a pad on his elbow or his knees his entire career.
You ever have knee problems?
Never.
Terry Funk, the challenger, getting back to his feet but losing his balance. His equilibrium is gone.
Terry even then was just a selling fool.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we wanted to bring up on this trilogy.
Hey, look at this Quarter Nelson. This is sweet.
His shoulders are down. 1, 2.
That's back to the amateur wrestling days, but these guys, they worked with each other so many times and so many combinations. Those now look at that classic backslide out of that
Near pin for
suplex,
Jack
of a
Brisco, the
wing
world champion.
suplex.
Defending
Now, who
his
was that
title.
referee, Jerry?
Here at
Sonny
Miami
Myers
Beach.
is a referee. Sonny was
Again,
famous in Kansas City.
Brisco
He
is
had a lot
faced
to do
now
with the
a
training
mask
of
agony.
Harley Race also.
As Terry Funk brought him down across his leg, and now Terry Funk continues
Very
to press
similar
that
to, say,
advantage.
Bronco Lubitsch, who was a great referee and manager before.
He's the same time, same era.
Jack Brisco and the world champion.
What's that?
In a
Same
lot of
time,
trouble now,
same
the
era
referee
with
checking, but
Bronco.
Brisco, pain coursing through his body, does not
Now,
concede.
both of these guys use leg holds for there's Terry's, the famous spinning toe hold from Amarillo, Texas, invented by Dory Funk Sr. And Jack counters it. Now, Jack's hold, of course, was the figure 4 leg lock.
But this is what I love. He goes to kick him off. Jack holds on. Jack holds on. It shows you how hard they're struggling
in desperation begins
to get their hold on the other guy.
It's funny, you know, a lot of guys have used borrowed the figure 4. Of course, Buddy, you and I like to laugh, you know, there's no first-time guys, you know, but Buddy Rogers is really probably the first guy to use the figure 4 leg lock. And a lot of people used it since that
see it again in slow motion.
The Nature Boy Ric Flair got it from Buddy Rogers, but Mario Cristobal, the great coach now at the University of Miami, just left the University of Oregon. He's a good friend of mine. He always says when people bring up the Ric Flair figure 4, because Mario grew up in Miami, he said, always correct him. He said, no, it's the Brisco figure 4. But they're both setting that up by working towards a leg. Terry with a spinning toe hold, Jack with his figure 4 toe. That
I love how when Jack would work that leg and go back on it, that Terry would do the whole hand stand up and sell it.
But this is some of the versatility of Terry. We showed the empty arena match last week, and we'll get to some real hardcore later on. But we wanted to show all the 3 faces of Terry Funk. You know, the creativity and the scientific part, and then next we'll get into the hardcore. But here's Jack going again for that figure 4, and look at this. Can we back that up, Josh? And Josh, we got Josh here helping us out here. We couldn't do this without Josh. But let's go into where he goes into it here. Here we go. And how simple of a finish is this thing?
Yep, and Terry's selling like crazy, doing the old dead fish.
Like Gordon said, he was open for 1 split second. Terry took advantage of it. And the crowd's actually shocked here. I mean, you see some Terry Funk fans out there, but most of them were Jack Brisco fans because it's Miami.
And they sure didn't expect to see something as big as a title change happen.
No. You didn't see that unless it was well advertised in the beginning. And then, you know, Terry coming out and taking the place of his brother there. But if you remember, John, and I think you're old enough to remember that, the old adage in professional wrestling, you never beat a substitute.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. I used to always hate when you go in somewhere and you have a substitute because you always had to do the job.
You knew what you were doing.
That's right. Substitutes always won.
And that's a famous Frank Freeman as ring announcer. Frank was the ring announcer, announced Muhammad Ali as the winner over Sonny Liston back in that fight there.
Wow.
The promoter of this show was Chris Dundee, who is Angelo Dundee, Muhammad Ali's brother. He was all out for this interview.
Turn this up if you would, Josh. Let's listen to this.
Heavyweight champion Terry Funk, the man who lived in the shadow of his brother for over 4 years, has finally achieved that pinnacle, the World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. And may I just say congratulations.
Thank you very much, Gordon. It's the proudest day of my life. Naturally, it is.
Well, I might just say this, of course, that Jack Brisco and the NWA, when they agree.
Look at the dome there. Look at the globe. There's a big dent in that globe there. I can tell you how that dent got there. Harley raised his head in Kansas City, Missouri. They were outside the ring, and Jack hit Harley with the belt, and Harley was supposed to get color, and Harley said, "Hit me again." And Jack thought he hit him as hard as he could, and he said, "Hit me." And so Jack reared back, and as Jack hit him, Harley threw his head into the damn belt. and it crushed that globe in. So that's how that dent in that belt. So if you see a belt and it has that dent in it, you can take the DNA off there and you can find Harley Race's DNA on that belt.
That's one of the
Agreed to allow Terry
stories I've ever heard. That's
Funk
awesome.
to substitute for his brother, Dory Funk Jr. Jack Brisco also had a return clause in the contract saying that in the event he lost, you would meet him this coming Tuesday in Tampa at the Armory.
Now, wait 1 second. I was under the assumption that I was going to go ahead and have the return match in Amarillo, Texas.
No, the champion stated in the contract itself that he had his choice of locations.
In Tampa, I've got to wrestle the man in a rematch in Tampa.
That is exactly correct.
Not Amarillo?
No, sir.
Well, I'll tell you one thing is I like the people of Florida. I love the people of Florida. But I'm countrified, and I'm Texas's pride. And first of all, I'm going to defend this belt for my mother's state of Texas. And I'll come down there and I'll wrestle a man in Tampa. And I'll tell you what, I intend on being something that Jack Brisco never was. And that's an offensive champion, not a defensive champion, not the kind of champion that continues to run to the ropes constantly during the match like Brisco has done. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the fight to this man and prove to you people that I will be the finest champion that this world has ever seen in professional wrestling.
Well, of course, at one point in the match when the referee was injured, he did have you pinned for easily a 5 count.
I don't recall that at all. I don't recall that.
Well, thank you so very much. There you have it, the new NWA World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, Terry Funk. I want to take a moment right now to talk to the, and I really hesitate to say this, but the former World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, Jack Brisco. And Jack, all I can say is that it was a tremendous battle, and hopefully after Tuesday night, you'll have that title back.
Well, I certainly plan on having it back, Gordon. I made a foolish mistake, and it cost me the match, and it cost me the World's Championship. The thing was unnerving about the whole thing, of course, is I had trained and I had studied, of course, films and of everything of Dory Funk Jr., and then at the last minute to get here and find out that Jr. was unable to make it and Terry was substituting for it. So in order for me to put the belt on the line against Terry, I made him agree that within 10 days that I would get a return match, and I would get to select the site that it's going to be held in. Of course, I wanted to be in Tampa, where I felt like was my home for quite a while, and where I got a lot of support from a lot of people. And I feel in Tampa on the rematch, I feel that there's just no way I'm going to make a mistake like that again. I'm going to get that belt back.
Well, Jack, of course, the referee was injured at one point in the match, and at that point you did have Terry Funk pinned.
That's true. I'd caught Terry in a suplex, and I'd had him down for quite a while, and I didn't realize the referee was even injured. And I looked around, I saw him hobbling around on his leg, but I just made a mistake, Gordon, and it cost me the World's Championship.
Well, I'm sure that I'm joining thousands of other people who are hopeful that this coming Tuesday night, once again, we'll be calling Jack Brisco the World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. And Jack, good luck to you.
Thank you, Gordon.
It just
That was
like
awesome.
awesome interview. He put Funk over, and he put the feud over. The feud being, that Funk didn't show up again. And all the fans at that time knew exactly what Jack was talking about that night in Houston when Jack was supposed to win the title, and Funk was a no-show there. So once again, it was building that family feud. And John, I'm patting myself on the back, but back in those days, the Briscoes and the Funks, any combination that you put, I mean, it was a good payoff that night. In other words, it was packed. And so we kind of built that family feud on that one incident of Funk getting hurt, not showing up in Houston. We went 15 years off of that thing.
You know what's so unusual about that? You had brothers teams before, in the 90s, you had the Steiners and Harlem Heat. They never did clash as much as, you'd like for them to have. But there's never been a time where both brothers teams, you got individual champions in each, but you're also at your prime against each other for an entire almost decade. It's an incredible time of the Funks versus the Briscoes.
Yeah, and the great thing about it, it wasn't only confined to the state of Texas and Florida. I mean, it was all over the nation and all over Japan, all over the Caribbean and Australia. It was just everywhere there was the NWA, we had that feud at one time or another. And I loved working with the Funk, and Jack did too. I mean, there was, that a lot of people thought there was always heat, with Funks and Briscoe. Hell, you could tell by those matches there were no heat in there. If there'd been heat, there'd been some selfishness somewhere along the line. But I challenge anybody in the world to go through and watch some of those matches and see if you can see a place where either one of those four guys are being selfish in the ring. Because we respected each other's ability. And I think I told you this the other night. In Jack's book, there's a quote from Jack, and somebody was asking Jack, what was the biggest night of your career? And he said, when Dory Funk Jr. beat Gene Kiniski in Tampa, Florida for the World Heavyweight Championship, because it opened the doors for athletes like me, and my brother, and Terry to win these championships instead of the big, monsters that the NWA liked back in there. They were athletes. They were some of the first college athletes to come along. So, we see all these things to Terry Funk, but then you just seeing the Terry Funk that had the wrestling skills and that old West Texas style there, you can see it coming out. The old man taught wrestling. The old man Dory Funk Sr. was a 3-time state champion in Indiana. Matter of fact, there's a push to name his high school after him, high school gymnasium after Dory Funk Sr. That's how good of an athlete he was up there. And then he got in the pros and he went down to Texas and established himself as a promoter and produced 2 of the greatest sons that ever in the history of our business there. So, but what a contrast, from the match we saw last week, the empty arena match to this.
That's right.
And then we're going to take it a step forward with the faces of Terry Funk.
And how great is Terry Funk in that promo where he's basically being a heel but acting like a babyface? That's what we say all the time. You've got to believe you're the good guy. When you say that about Jack Briscoe as a defensive champion, and he's describing himself, in his mind, he believes it, or at least in that character's mind. It's just brilliant. And your brother's promo is the greatest working promo ever. He's the happiest man alive to drop that title. No. He's ready to go fishing.
He's ready to get on that 32-foot yacht. Go out in the damn baby.
He's got a fishing pole at the back door, and Gordon sold it. As soon as he's done, he's going to see him leaving. He's like, I'm so sorry I lost that title, made a mistake.
Yeah, he's coming out to Lake next week.
That's right. How was the match 10 days? Did they do the match 10 days later in Tampa?
Well, honestly, I was in the Carolinas working myself that night, so I didn't see that. I wasn't even at the arena for this match here. I was in the Carolinas, and it's funny, I'll go back to the first night in Houston when Funk didn't show up. Gary Hart actually called me. He knew where I'd be. He knew I'd be in Richmond, Virginia, at the Stockyard, at the old Fairgrounds Arena out in Richmond, Virginia, working for the Mernick family out there on Friday night, Richmond. And so I talked to Gary, and Gary called me. Hey, I think he called me to ask what time Jack was coming in so he could pick him up, all that stuff. He said, I'll give you a call after the match. So Gary called me, and so Gary was the first one to inform me that Dory didn't show up, and of course Gary had all kinds of stories too, and why, but Gary Hart was the first one, and then Gary called me when the actual drop actually happened. Gary was the one that called me that night, told me the good news.
The good news, that's right. It's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there you have another best of the best stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. One of the greatest NWA champions, one of the greatest amateur champions of all time, Mr. Jack Briscoe and Mr. Terry Funk. And we'll continue this series on Terry Funk next week, depending on when you're watching this. You can catch it on our YouTube channel after a week has elapsed, and all this stuff will be listed under Best of the Best, where we have the quarterfinals, or the semifinals rather, of the match of Tiger Jeet Singh versus Terry Funk in the world famous death match tournament in 1995 in Japan.